We often talk about the pressure of modern life, right? This feeling that the world is always watching, always judging.
Oh, absolutely.
We stress about career paths, social media, this crushing weight of expectation to just have it all figured out. It feels so unique to our time, doesn't it?
It does, and that's because the pressures we face are, digitized and global. But
Yeah.
the core idea, this intense societal pressure, that's not a modern invention at all.
Right.
The fundamental human experience of having your identity assigned to you by society, rather than discovered on your own terms, that story is as old as civilization itself.
Okay, so let's unpack that across time,
Yeah.
because today we're doing four really distinct, fascinating deep dives. We're going to start in ancient Rome with all its noise and duty.
Then leap forward to the very structured, almost theatrical world of medieval courtly love.
And from there into the darker rooms of Victorian medical diagnosis, and then we'll end on the battlefield with Alexander the Great.
And our source material for this is incredibly diverse. We're looking at military history, social customs, philosophy, even early medical journals.
So, what's the common thread that ties them all together?
It's how these societies tried to control or manage or even channel the intense pressure of expectations they placed on people, usually during their most vulnerable formative years.
And what happens when that external pressure, that assigned identity, becomes so intense that the only escape, the only release valve, is found through something else entirely?
Like ritual or romantic fantasy.
Or, in the case of the Victorians, having your personality labeled as a medical disease.
Exactly. That's the core question. Our mission today is to pull out those surprising, high-value details about just how structured life was in these past worlds, and to understand why that structure, that enormous weight of expectation, often led to something completely unpredictable.
Like art or chaos or even the forging of an empire.
Precisely.
So, our journey begins in a city that demanded you jump straight from childhood to duty without really a breath in between. Ancient Rome. Let's set the scene. If you were a teenager in Rome, your world was just punishingly loud before you even opened your eyes.
It's so true. The sources are really clear on this. The Roman city wasn't interested in your gentle waking process. As one satirist put it, the city has already declared war on your sleep.
Declared war on your sleep. I love that. So you're not woken up by birdsong.
No, you're woken by the infrastructure of an empire grinding into gear.
And what does that actually sound like? I mean, what are we hearing in those pre-dawn hours?
It's a symphony of commerce and frustration. You hear the cart drivers, for one. They're already yelling at their mules, who are, famously stubborn.
Right, and those iron-rimmed wheels on cobblestones must have been deafening.
Absolutely. Then you've got the roosters, who seem to operate on an aggressively early schedule. The public bathhouses are opening, water pipes are rattling, and then immediately the arguments. Over everything. Over market stalls, the price of bread, right-of-way in the narrow streets. The city is awake, and it's already fighting, and the sun isn't even fully up yet.
And I imagine your housing situation really dictates how much of that you have to endure.
It does. If you're wealthy, you're in a domus, one of those beautiful villas. Marble floors, mosaics.
Yeah.
But because of the design, the open-air courtyards, they essentially become these wind tunnels with expensive decor.
So you're still hearing the city.
Oh yeah, just a bit muffled. And you're woken by a servant who's probably been up for hours tending to the lamps.
And if you're not wealthy, if you're part of the vast majority,
You're in an insula, a multi-story apartment building. Privacy is just not a concept. You're sharing a single room with your whole family, maybe some relatives.
on a straw mattress, I'm guessing.
A straw mattress on the floor, yes. And the only way you know it's morning is when a sibling rolls off their pile of straw and onto your face.
That's a very effective alarm clock.
It is. The only way to escape the noise inside is to get up and go out into the even louder noise outside.
Honestly, you'd think someone would have invented the modern soundproof door just to block out the Roman scent profile alone.
You would think so. And that scent profile? It's not subtle. It's this powerful, honest cocktail. You've got fermented fish sauce, the garum everywhere.
I've heard about that stuff.
It's pungent. Then add sweat, massive amounts of olive oil for bathing and cooking, wood smoke, incense, and the key ingredient. Whatever mystery liquid your upstairs neighbor threw out the window last night.
Because there's no indoor plumbing for most people.
Exactly. It's a city that just demands endurance to exist in.
Okay, so you're awake, you've survived the smells. Let's talk about breakfast, because it sounds like meal is a very generous word for it.
It's underwhelming, for sure. The Romans focused on lunch and dinner. Breakfast, or intaculum, is more of a suggestion of food. a whisper.
So for a wealthy kid, what's on the menu?
It's basically snack food, some bread, maybe dipped in honey, dried fruit, olives, a small piece of cheese. It's light. It doesn't really sound like it could power an empire.
No. And for the poor.
Hard bread. I mean, really hard bread. The kind that would give you a concussion if you threw it. The life hack was to soften it in watered wine.
Which is just a fantastic culture shock, right? So we're so worried about caffeine for teenagers today.
I know.
And Roman parents are handing their 13-year-old a cup of diluted wine and saying, hydrate, because the water quality was so bad. It had the personality of a questionable pond.
Exactly. The low alcohol wine made it safer to drink. It's purely pragmatic.
Yeah.
But yes, the contrast is hilarious.
Stroke your wine, now go study rhetoric.
That's the perfect transition, because the moment that signals this huge shift, this great shove into responsibility, is the toga ceremony.
The toga virilis ceremony. This happens around age 13, maybe a bit later. And there's no real teenage phase. Rome looks at a boy and says, okay, you're done being a child. You're useful now. You're a man. And it's an immediate public political transition. He sheds the old toga, the one with the purple stripe for minors.
Toga praetexta, yes. And he puts on the plain white toga virilis. And the descriptions we have of this garment are just wonderful. It's a giant, heavy, overly dramatic bedsheet designed to make you trip in public.
So it's intentionally difficult to wear.
Oh, absolutely. It's a tool of social engineering. It's this immense piece of heavy wool, maybe 18 feet long. It's uncooperative. It forces you to adopt a slow, dignified posture just to keep it from falling off.
I could just picture a 13-year-old trying to manage that.
The sources say he looks like he's fighting a sea creature. The sheer weight of the fabric is a physical reminder of the new weight of expectation he now carries.
And it's not just symbolic. This isn't just a costume change.
Not at all. This is a vital point. Overnight, he gains legal rights. He can vote in some assemblies, sign contracts. He's now politically responsible for his actions. He's officially on the cursus honorum, the path of political offices. So every mistake is no longer a childish slip-up. It's a man's failure, and it reflects on his entire family.
And what about for girls? The pressure hits them just as hard, but in a different way.
Even harder and faster. For a noble girl, the shift is from being a child to being a Virgo, a young woman ready for marriage. It's abrupt. One morning you're playing with clay dolls. The next your mother is discussing your dowry and your father's political alliances.
At 13 or 14?
Yes. An age where modern kids are just starting to figure things out. A Roman girl is expected to master household management, supervise slaves, maintain the family's reputation for purity, all in preparation for a marriage that's about property and producing heirs.
So there's really no time for self-discovery. Rome just assigns you your identity.
It assigns it based on class, gender, and family. If your father's a baker, you're becoming a baker. If he's a senator, you're heading for the forum. Duty over discovery, every time.
And on top of all that, you're constantly being watched. You mentioned Rome was a city of professional gossipers.
It means privacy was not a thing. The city was dense, public. Everything was judged. Your posture, your grammar, how well your toga was folded, how you walked, too slow, you're lazy, too fast, you're anxious. The whole city is this collective parental unit.
That sounds absolutely exhausting. I'd think school would be a refuge, but it wasn't.
Not at all. The schools, the ludas, were not quiet, separate buildings. They were loud, public, outdoor affairs, often just a rented space off the marketplace. So you're trying to learn philosophy while a fishmonger is haggling 3 feet away.
How could anyone concentrate?
It must have been incredibly difficult. The teacher, the literator, is demanding your focus while ignoring the complete chaos of the city happening all around you.
And the curriculum itself sounds pretty grueling, learning Greek and Latin at the same time.
Suffering academically from 2 directions at once, as one source put it. Greek was for philosophy and art. Latin was for law and politics. So you had to master both to be considered educated.
But the main event, the subject they trained for, like, athletes, was rhetoric.
Without a doubt. Yeah. The Romans believed that if you could argue, well, if you could persuade a crowd, you could do anything. So teens debated everything. Politics, poetry, architecture. It wasn't about quiet study, it was training for a public, competitive life in the forum.
So with all this structure and pressure and noise, how did Roman kids blow off steam? Where was the release valve?
The release was found in pure, unregulated chaos. First, the streets themselves. They were this dangerous, crowded, unregulated obstacle course, dodging carts, dogs, unexpected puddles.
The mystery liquids from upstairs.
Those two. It was a physical release.
Yeah.
But the real social release valve, the neutral territory, was the public baths.
Thermae.
Exactly. The baths were cheap, which was key.
Mm-hmm.
And they were not the serene spas we imagine today. They were chaotic, loud, humid, and just full of gossip. It was the only place where class distinctions blurred a little and you could just be a kid.
Let's talk about that experience. You go in, you strip down.
You try to make sure the attendant doesn't steal your clothes in the locker room, the apoditarium. Then you start the circuit.
The warm room, the hot room.
The tepidarium and then the calidarium, yeah. You'd go into the hot room to sweat and complain about your teachers. And then came the ultimate test.
The cold plunge.
The frigidarium. This was the Roman version of a dare. It was a social ritual. Who's brave enough to jump in? You'd emerge shivering and laughing, and then go eat snacks.
Friendships were forged there, I bet. And I assume, despite all the rules, teenage crushes still happened.
Of course they did. Human nature finds a way. You couldn't just go talk to someone, that would be a scandal. So you had to master the art of the sideways glance.
And they used wax tablets for love letters?
Yes. Perfect for dramatic, secret messages. You'd scratch out these grand declarations, borrowing lines from the poets you were studying. Your beauty burns brighter than Vesta's flame, that kind of thing.
It shows that even in this city obsessed with duty, they found ways to feel everything, to flirt, to dream.
They had to. A system that demands you become a 40-year-old at 13 is bound to create pressure. Those emotional releases were essential for survival.
Okay, so from the very public physical duty of Rome, let's travel forward about 1,000 years. We're going to medieval Europe, where society also had intense pressures, but the release valve was completely different. It was an intellectual, emotional ideal. Courtly love.
So we shift from Roman duty to medieval order. And to understand courtly love, you have to understand the core problem. Noble marriage was completely unromantic.
Right, it was all business. Property, alliances, land, heirs, feelings were, what, a liability.
The huge liability.
Yeah.
A noble child's marriage could be decided before they could even walk. You married a title, you married a fortress, you didn't marry a person for love.
So you could end up with a husband who is twice your age and mostly interested in his hunting dogs.
And that was just your reality. The system was stable, but for the people inside it, it was often an emotional desert.
And into this desert comes courtly love. It's like this cultural, philosophical loophole.
That's a great way to put it. It was a kind of sport where passionate, obsessive devotion to someone unattainable was seen as the highest form of nobility.
And the key word there is unattainable.
It's the whole engine of the system. The love had to be impossible, or it wasn't worthy. The ideal lady was almost always married, usually to someone older, powerful, and probably not a big fan of poetry.
So the obstacle wasn't a bug, it was the feature. A love you couldn't have was considered perfection.
Exactly. It required what one source calls weaponized longing. The pursuit, the suffering, the way it forced you to become a better person. That was the real goal, not, actually getting the girl.
If you got the girl, the game was over.
The game was over, and it stopped being courtly and just became messy. The purest love was the one that stayed unfulfilled and tortured you just enough to write good poetry about it.
Let's break down the roles in this drama. First, you have the lady, put up on this impossibly high pedestal.
She wasn't really treated as a real woman. She became a fictional symbol. She was a moral North Star, a muse, a judge. Her role was to inspire virtue in her knight.
And to reject him. But not too harshly.
Precisely. She had to reject him with polite cruelty, keep him devoted, but always at a distance. And this gave noble women, who had very little real power, this unexpected, subtle form of social power.
By being unattainable, she could dictate the behavior of powerful men.
She could. She could demand, through her rejection, that he become braver, more moral, more cultured.
And the knight's role, it sounds like pure codified suffering.
It was. Total obedience, constant self-improvement, and what our source calls dramatic suffering that modern audiences would classify as unpaid theater.
So he had to perform his love.
Constantly. There were rituals. Carrying her token, a ribbon, a glove into battle, publicly declaring that his victories belonged to her. He had to sigh, dramatically look pale, maybe fast a little to show his devotion was more important than food.
The suffering was the proof of his commitment.
Absolutely. Pain proved his depth. Restraint proved his virtue. It was a high-stakes psychological performance.
And this wasn't just some organic thing that happened. It was regulated. There was a rule book.
There was. A cleric named Andreas Capellanus wrote this treatise in the 12th century, De Amor, The Art of Courtly Love. It's this sort of unwritten constitution for the whole affair.
And what are some of the rules?
Well, the most famous one is that marriage is no real excuse for not loving.
So the medieval world officially declared marriage too boring to count as love.
Basically, yes. If you loved your spouse, you were kind of doing it wrong. You were outside the cool intellectual movement. Another key rule was that love thrives on difficulty. Obstacles like an angry husband were considered vital ingredients.
Without suffering, it's not real love, it's just a pleasant afternoon.
And pleasant afternoons don't make for good poetry.
So how did this idea, this very specific aristocratic game, spread across Europe?
That was the job of the troubadours. You can think of them as the medieval PR agents.
The poet musicians.
Exactly. They traveled from court to court, and they turned this noble longing into the chart-topping hits of the era. They spread the formula.
And they had powerful patrons like Eleanor of Aquitaine.
Eleanor was central. She was Queen of France, then Queen of England. Her court was basically a romantic think tank. She gave the troubadours prestige and political cover to write these elaborate verses about knights adoring ladies they could never ever touch.
But this whole system walked a very fine line, didn't it? The adultery tightrope.
A very fine line. It had to look adulterous to be dramatic and passionate, but it absolutely could not become adulterous, or you'd have feuds, political crises, maybe a dagger in the back.
So it's all based on this massive social hypocrisy.
It is. It's all about pretending. You can swear eternal devotion in a beautifully written poem, but not in a dark corridor. Society condemned adultery while glamorizing the desire for it.
Did this actually cause real-world problems, or was it just a game?
Oh, it caused real, large-scale political chaos. When Eleanor of Aquitaine set up her courts of love, where noble women would judge romantic disputes,
She was creating a counter-system to male feudal power.
she was. And her obsession with this system was a major factor in the breakdown of her marriage to the King of France. It proved the system could destabilize real power. It was geopolitics with better metaphors.
What did the church think of all this? Knights worshiping ladies instead of, God.
The church was predictably horrified. They saw it as a form of heresy. You're displacing the proper object of devotion, God, with a human being. They warned that it could corrupt kingdoms faster than war itself.
And yet it lasted for centuries. It was this strange, brilliant spark in a world built on duty.
It was a cultural coping mechanism, and its legacy is profound. It basically invented the idea of romantic idealization. Every time you see a character in a movie pining for someone unavailable, you're hearing the faint echo of a 12th century troubadour.
It's an incredible story. Okay, from romantic escape, we moved to the Victorian era, where society decided that if a woman failed her duty, it wasn't a moral problem. It was a disease.
The Victorian era is this fascinating contradiction. You have immense scientific progress, but you also have the invention of this whole catalog of female disorders that really serve one purpose: social control.
So medicine became morality wearing a stethoscope.
That's the perfect phrase for it. Doctors saw themselves as guardians of the social order. The pressure on a middle or upper class woman was to be pious, pure, domestic, submissive. If she expressed any desire for anything else, education, independence, that desire was immediately labeled as dangerous.
Medically dangerous.
Medically or morally dangerous, yes. And the main label, the catch-all diagnosis, was hysteria.
The medical Swiss Army knife.
It was spectacularly vague. It covered hundreds of symptoms, from actual physical pain to behavioral traits like fainting, irritability,
Anxiety,
the desire for independence.
a desire for independence, even excessive sexual feeling. If a woman was angry about her lack of rights or just overwhelmed by her life, she wasn't oppressed. She was hysterical.
So it pathologized any kind of nonconformity. It was a way to dismiss a woman's suffering and just silence her. And it rendered her testimony unreliable. The hypocrisy was stark.
Yeah.
A man with the same symptoms was just tired from work or suffering from neurasthenia. His stress was legitimate. Hers was a biological flaw tied to her reproductive organs.
And this was all connected to a wider fear, right? The fear of degeneracy.
A huge fear. The idea that modern life, industrialization, and especially female desire was corrupting morals and weakening the race. Doctors warned that too much reading could lead to moral overexcitement.
Moral overexcitement. I'm not even sure what that means.
It means she was thinking too much, and that was seen as a threat to her primary function, which was reproductive.
So the treatments weren't about healing her distress. They were about disciplining her back into her role.
Exactly. Sedation, isolation, and most famously, the rest cure.
The Rest Cure, developed by Dr. Silas Weir Mitchell. This sounds so benign, but it was anything but.
It was psychological imprisonment disguised as therapy. The regimen was brutal in its simplicity.
Total inactivity.
Total Forced inactivity for weeks, sometimes months. You're confined to bed, usually in a dark room. You're forbidden from reading, writing, sewing, thinking hard. You are often force-fed rich diets to restore your flesh.
It's an intentional effort to strip away any sense of agency or intellectual life.
That was the explicit goal. Mitchell believed hysteria was caused by a woman overtaxing her mind. The cure was to enforce total submission. And the more a woman resisted, the more it proved she was hysterical and needed more rest.
And the most famous account of this is Charlotte Perkins Gilman's story, The Yellow Wallpaper.
A vital piece of literature, because it's based on her own experience with Mitchell's rest cure. She was suffering from severe depression, and he prescribed this, forbidding her from ever writing again.
What happened to her?
She said she came very near the borderline of utter mental ruin. The Yellow Wallpaper is her fictionalized account of that. A woman driven to madness by enforced inactivity, who starts seeing figures in the wallpaper. It's a powerful metaphor for that domestic cage.
And if isolation didn't work, there was always sedation.
The chemical lock. They had a huge enthusiasm for drugs that dulled the mind. Opium, laudanum, which was an alcohol and opium mix you could buy anywhere, and chloral hydrate or knockout drops.
And these were used to treat anxiety, grief.
But also restlessness, frustration, anger. The goal wasn't health. The goal was silence. That was a real prescription.
And this fear was at its most intense when it came to female sexuality.
Absolutely. To Victorian doctors, a woman's sexuality was this dangerous, destabilizing force. So they pathologized it immediately with a diagnosis of nymphomania.
Which, again, was incredibly broad.
It covered everything from a high libido to just enjoying marital intimacy. Medical journals warned it could cause insanity or death.
And the treatments were extreme.
They were acts of violence, forced isolation, ice baths, and in some cases clitoridectomies, the surgical removal of the clitoris, justify as a medical necessity to save a woman's morality.
It's just horrifying to think about. And yet, there's this bizarre contradiction. The same medical world invented the pelvic massage.
Yes. This is one of the strangest chapters in medical history. Doctors believe hysteria symptoms were caused by a congested uterus. So they would perform a manual massage to relieve the congestion,
Until the patient reached what they called a paroxysm.
which we now recognize as an orgasm. It was a clinical act that allowed male doctors to produce pleasure while publicly insisting they didn't really understand it, because the idea of conscious female desire was just too threatening.
So while they were busy inventing these diseases, they were completely failing to diagnose real suffering.
Completely. Conditions we know today, like endometriosis, chronic pain, postpartum depression, all of it was just dismissed as female nerves or exaggeration.
Postpartum depression was seen as madness.
Puerperal madness, yes.
Yeah.
Women were institutionalized, sometimes permanently, when they needed compassion and medical help. Their pain was seen as a failure of their feminine duty.
And you can still see the ghosts of these diagnoses today, can't you? In the subtle ways women's pain can be dismissed as anxiety or being emotional.
The legacy is definitely still with us. But so is the legacy of resistance. Women like Gilman and another incredible figure, Elizabeth Packard, who was institutionalized by her husband for disagreeing with him. They fought back. Their voices, once silenced, ultimately forced reform.
It's a powerful, difficult, and necessary part of this story. Okay, now for our final pivot. We're going to a world where expectation wasn't meant to control or silence someone, but to forge them into a singular, world-conquering weapon. Alexander the Great.
Alexander was born into a world that was already humming with ambition. His childhood was built on this impossibly high set of expectations from his two very powerful, very different parents.
Olympias and Philip II.
Exactly. On one side, you have his mother, Olympias. She was intense, mystical, volatile. She was involved in mystery cults, rumored to handle snakes. She's the one who told Alexander he was descended from the hero Achilles.
So she's the one who gave him that sense of divine destiny.
She fueled it. For her, myth was scripture. She convinced him he was chosen for greatness, which gave him this almost superhuman confidence his whole life.
And on the other side, you have his father, Philip, the practical military titan.
Philip taught Alexander the opposite lesson. Greatness isn't a gift, it's earned. In sweat, in planning, in ruthless discipline, he filled the palace with generals and strategists. Alexander was learning military logistics before he could read.
And the famous story of his horse, Bucephalus, seems to capture that perfectly, this merging of destiny and discipline.
It's the perfect anecdote. Philip buys this huge, uncontrollable black stallion that no one can tame.
And Alexander, as a young boy, is the only one who notices what's really going on.
He sees that the horse isn't wild, it's just afraid of its own shadow.
Right.
So he gently turns the horse towards the sun, the shadow disappears, and he mounts him easily.
And Philip's reaction is just legendary.
He says, "My son, you must find a kingdom big enough for your ambitions. Macedonia is too small for you." That was it. That was the confirmation. The expectations of both his parents merged into a single command: conquer.
So when Alexander's 13, Philip decides he needs more than just military training. He needs the best mind in the world. He summons Aristotle.
An unbelievable investment. Bringing Aristotle, Plato's student, to Macedonia to teach a prince was unprecedented. Alexander was apparently surprised. He expected another warrior, not a man in a linen cloak.
But Aristotle posed the question that changed everything for him.
He did. He asked, "Is it better to conquer the world or to understand it?"
And he taught him not just to worship heroes like Achilles, but to analyze them.
Exactly. To understand their motivations, their triumphs, and their fatal flaws. The lesson was that true rule required profound thought, not just brute force.
But Alexander filtered all of this through his own lens of ambition and conquest.
He did. For him, mathematics was logistics. Poetry was propaganda. Rhetoric was command presence. Philosophy wasn't a distraction from war, it was a refinement of it. It made him a more complex, more adaptable general.
And he wasn't studying alone, he was there with his companions.
His peer group, yes. Hephaestion, Ptolemy, Cassander. These weren't just classmates, they were his future generals. They grew up in this intensely competitive environment, constantly sharpening each other like blades.
So while Aristotle shaped his mind, Philip was shaping his body. The Macedonian military training was famously brutal.
It was designed to create the most professional fighting force in the world. Training started before dawn. Long marches with heavy packs, climbing icy rivers in full gear. Philip wanted him to conquer discomfort and fear itself.
And they were training with the sarissa. We should explain what that was.
The sarissa was the key to the new Macedonian phalanx. It was this massive pike, maybe 18 or 20 feet long, that you had to wield with both hands.
So it required incredible strength and teamwork.
It did. And it created this impenetrable wall of spear points that terrified their enemies. Alexander didn't just learn to fight, he learned how to execute a tactical revolution.
But his first real battlefield wasn't a military one, it was the royal court in Pella.
You could argue it was the most dangerous one. It was a storm of ambition, jealousy, and schemes, with Philip's multiple wives and all their children vying for favor.
So he learned politics the hard way.
He had to. He learned to read a room with unnerving precision. He had to balance his mother's paranoia with his father's pragmatism. He learned that political danger often speaks softly. Intrigue became his first weapon.
And he got his first real command when he was still a teenager.
Mid-teens, yes. Philip was away on a campaign, and a rebellion flared up. He left Alexander in charge, which stunned the older, skeptical nobles.
And Alexander didn't just play defense.
No, he went on the attack. He planned a swift, aggressive campaign, used his companion cavalry to hit the enemy's flank before they even knew what was happening, and crucially, he fought at the front with his men.
And the result.
Total victory. The troops adored him, and the skeptical nobles started watching him with this new, uneasy respect. He had tasted command and found it intoxicating. By 17, he wasn't a student anymore. He was a rising storm, ready to be unleashed on the world.
What a stark and really interconnected contrast we've seen today. We've looked at 4 profoundly different ways that societies have tried to manage the unruly, unpredictable nature of the individual.
We started in Rome, which just demanded immediate duty. It turned 13-year-olds into miniature senators, policed by constant public scrutiny. The pressure was all external all the time.
Then we jumped to medieval Europe, where society basically invented romantic fantasy courtly love as an emotional pressure valve, a poetic escape from loveless marriages.
Then we saw the dark side of that control in the Victorian era, which sought to medicalize any departure from a woman's duty, using diagnoses like hysteria to enforce silence and conformity.
And finally with Alexander in Macedon, where all that immense expectation was channeled, refined, and weaponized, using philosophy and military rigor to forge ambition into a world-conquering force.
All 4 eras across 2 millennia show societies trying to manage the power of human desire and free will. And the constant thread, I think, is the surprising resilience of the individual response.
The ability of the person under that pressure to find a release, or a rebellion, or a path to transformation.
Whether it was the Roman kids finding chaos in the baths, the knight finding purpose and longing, the Victorian woman finding a voice through resistance, or Alexander forging an empire.
The pressure was always there, but the outcome was defined by the person under that weight.
And that leads us to the final thought we want to leave you with, something to mull over. If Alexander the Great's world-changing ambition was refined by philosophy, and Victorian distress was so often caused by the refusal of philosophy, the denial of independent thought and agency.
What crucial modern societal expectation are we currently pathologizing or romanticizing instead of simply addressing its root cause? Think about that as you navigate your own 21st century pressures.